Hey, Mr. Martin's IB biology class. Welcome to another deep dive. This time it's all about transport systems. You know, the ways that plants and animals get like all the important stuff, the water, nutrients, oxygen, all that, to where it needs to go in their bodies.
It really is amazing how all these different kinds of life have developed such complicated systems for this.
Right.
And what's really cool is that they all use the same basic ideas from physics, things like pressure and diffusion, but they each have their own unique twists to make it work for them.
So let's kick things off with plants.
Okay.
They might seem kind of still and passive, but they've got this whole highway system going on inside for moving water and nutrients around.
That's right. And it's all built around this thing called the xylem.
Xylem.
Yeah, imagine a bunch of dead cells all stacked up end to end, forming these hollow tubes, and they're reinforced with this stuff called lignin.
Wait, dead cells. How can something that's dead be so important for keeping a plant alive?
Well, because there's no cell stuff inside those tubes, it's like a super smooth, clear path for water to flow through. And that lignin, it's like adding steel beams to a building. It gives the xylem the strength it needs so it doesn't collapse under pressure. Because believe me, there's a lot of pressure in there.
So you're telling me plants basically have a plumbing system that's more advanced than what's in some buildings?
Pretty much.
Wow.
And if you look even closer, you'll see these tiny little holes in the xylem walls called pits.
Pits?
Yeah, think of them like emergency exits. If one of the tubes gets blocked for some reason, the water can take a detour through those pits and keep flowing. It's a pretty resilient system.
That's incredible. But how does water actually travel up the plant, against gravity without something like a heart to pump it?
Oh, that's where this awesome thing called the transpiration cohesion tension mechanism comes in.
Transpiration, cohesion, tension.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But think about it like this. When water evaporates from the leaves, it creates this suction force that pulls water up the xylem. And water molecules, they're really clingy. They like to stick together. So they form this continuous column of water all the way up the plant.
So it's like a chain being pulled from the top, pulling all the water up with it.
Exactly. And this pull, it's strong enough to draw water all the way from the roots to the leaves, even in a really tall tree.
Wow, that's
That's
amazing.
pretty cool.
But don't plants sometimes need a little extra push to get the water moving, especially when it's really humid out?
You're right, they do. And that's where root pressure comes in.
Root pressure.
It's all about osmosis.
Okay.
The roots use energy to pump mineral ions into the xylem.
Right.
And since there's now a higher concentration of stuff in the xylem, water follows along by osmosis, trying to even things out. This creates a push from the bottom, helping to force water upward.
So it's not just passive flow. The roots are actively creating this pressure to move the water.
You got it. And you know how you see dew on the grass in the morning? That's often root pressure in action. It's most noticeable when transpiration is low, like at night or when it's humid.
Okay, so we've talked about the water highway in plants.
Right.
What about the system for delivering sugars? That's the phloem, right?
You got it. The phloem is like the plant's sugar delivery service, transporting sugars made during photosynthesis to all the parts of the plant that need them.
Gotcha.
Unlike the xylem, though, which is made of dead cells, the phloem is made of living cells called sieve tubes, all connected end to end with these porous sieve plates.
Porous, meaning?
Meaning they have tiny holes that allow the sugary sap to flow through smoothly.
Ah, okay. So it's more like a two-way street compared to the xylem's one-way flow.
Exactly.
But how do those sugars actually get loaded into the phloem in the first place?
Well, that's where the companion cells come in. They're like the phloem's personal assistants, making sure everything runs smoothly.
Personal assistance?
Yeah, they're packed with mitochondria, which are like the powerhouses of the cell, providing the energy needed to actively pump sugars into the sieve tubes. And they're connected to the sieve tubes through these tiny channels called plasmodesmata. It's like a direct line of communication, letting them share resources and coordinate the whole process.
So it's a pretty sophisticated system, even at the cellular level.
It is.
But how does this sugary sap actually move through the plant? Is it like the water in the xylem pulled upward?
It's a bit different. It's called pressure flow.
Pressure flow.
Yeah, and it's all about creating a difference in pressure between where the sugars are made, called the source, and where they're needed, called the sink.
Oh.
By actively loading sugars at the source and unloading them at the sink, the plant creates this pressure gradient. And just like with water, things flow from high pressure to low pressure, so the water flows, carrying the sugars along with it.
So plants are manipulating pressure again, just in a different way this time.
Exactly. It's a testament to how ingenious plants are at using these basic principles to their advantage.
Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about how animals, especially mammals like us, transport all those vital materials. Unlike plants, we've got this closed circulatory system, which means our blood is always contained within vessels, like arteries and veins.
Right, and at the heart of it all are these tiny little blood vessels called capillaries.
Capillaries.
Yeah, and their walls are incredibly thin, only one cell thick.
Really, just one cell.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that thinness is super important because it allows for really efficient exchange of stuff, gases, nutrients, waste products, all that between the blood and the surrounding tissues.
So it's all about maximizing surface area for those exchanges.
Exactly. And some capillaries even have these tiny little holes in their walls called fenestrations.
Fenestration.
Yeah, think of them like express lanes on a highway, allowing for even faster transport, especially for bigger molecules. You find them in organs where you need really rapid exchange, like your kidneys, where blood is filtered, and your small intestine, where you absorb nutrients.
See, that makes sense. So it's like having different types of capillaries for different jobs. Now, let's move on to the high-pressure pipelines of the circulatory system, the arteries. These are the vessels that carry blood away from the heart, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And they need to be pretty tough to handle all that pressure.
Oh, absolutely. They need to withstand the force of every single heartbeat. That's why they have these thick, elastic walls made of smooth muscle and connective tissue. They stretch and recoil with each beat, like a rubber band, making sure the blood keeps flowing smoothly.
So they're like the superhighways of the circulatory system, built for speed and durability.
You got it.
Now, what about the return trip? That's where veins come in, right?
Exactly. Veins bring blood back to the heart.
Right.
Their walls are thinner than arteries because the pressure is lower.
That makes sense.
But there's a challenge here.
What's that?
How does blood flow upward against gravity, especially from your legs all the way back to your heart?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, that's where valves come in.
Valves.
Yeah, veins have these one-way valves that act like little trapdoors. They prevent blood from flowing backward, making sure it only moves in one direction.
Got it.
And your muscles help out too.
Muscles. How do they help?
As your muscles contract, they squeeze the veins, kind of like giving the blood a little push along,
Oh, okay.
like a natural pump, assisting the blood flow back to the heart. And this is especially important in your legs, where gravity is working against the blood flow.
So it's like a team effort, valves and muscles working together to keep the blood moving in the right direction.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about the heart of the matter, the mammalian heart.
Right.
It's this powerful pump with 4 chambers,
That's right. 4 chambers.
2 atria, and 2 ventricles.
Yep.
And they all work together in this perfectly synchronized dance to keep the blood circulating.
Exactly. The right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the body and pumps it to the lungs,
Right.
while the left side receives oxygenated blood from the lungs and pumps it out to the rest of the body.
So it's like having 2 separate pumps working in perfect harmony.
Ex-
Now, what sets the rhythm for this dance?
That would be the pacemaker,
Pacemaker.
also known as the sinoatrial node or SA node.
Okay.
It's like a tiny little conductor in your heart, setting the beat and making sure everything stays in sync. It can speed up the heart rate when you need more oxygen, like when you're exercising,
Makes sense.
and it slows it down when you're at rest.
So it's like the heart's own internal control system.
Exactly.
Now, what about those valves in the heart? What do they do?
Those valves are super important because they make sure that the blood only flows in one direction. There are valves between the atria and the ventricles, called the atrioventricular valves, and valves at the exits of the ventricles, called semilunar valves.
Okay.
These valves act like little gatekeepers, preventing backflow and keeping the blood moving efficiently.
So it's a no backflow policy for the heart.
Exactly.
Now, if the heart is busy pumping blood to the rest of the body, how does it get its own blood supply?
That's a great question.
It's working so hard, it must need a lot of fuel.
It does, and that's where the coronary vessels come in.
Coronary vessels.
Yeah, these are special blood vessels that branch off from the aorta, which is the main artery leaving the heart,
All right.
and they deliver oxygen-rich blood directly to the heart muscle.
So it's like a self-sustaining system within a system.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about the double circulation system that mammals have. You mentioned earlier that blood goes through the heart twice in one cycle. Why is that? What's the advantage of having this 2-loop system?
Well, the double circulation is a pretty ingenious adaptation.
Okay.
It allows for efficient oxygen delivery
Uh-huh.
and higher metabolic rates.
Okay.
It's basically like having two interconnected loops, one for sending deoxygenated blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen,
Right.
and another one for sending that freshly oxygenated blood out to the rest of the body.
Gotcha.
This separation is key because it prevents the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood.
I see.
It also allows for higher pressure in the loop that goes to the body, which is important for delivering oxygen to all the tissues. Right.
While keeping the pressure lower in the loop that goes to the lungs so it doesn't damage those delicate lung tissues.
So it's a matter of having the right pressure in the right places.
You got it.
And this double circulation is what allows mammals to be so active and energetic.
Exactly.
This has been incredibly insightful.
Okay.
I mean, from those tiny capillaries to the powerful pump of the heart.
Yeah.
It's really amazing how all these different systems work together to keep us alive.
It really is. It's a testament to the power of evolution and how interconnected all living things are.
Absolutely.
And we've really only scratched the surface here.
Right.
There's so much more to explore when it comes to transport systems.
So we've covered quite a bit about how these transport systems work, but what happens when things go wrong? I mean, these systems seem pretty important, so there must be some consequences if they don't function properly, right? Oh, absolutely. Disruptions to these transport systems can cause all sorts of problems. In plants, for example, if the xylem gets blocked, it can lead to wilting because water can't reach the leaves.
Right.
Or if the phloem gets messed up, the plant might not grow properly because it can't transport sugars to where they're needed.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And in animals, I imagine problems with the circulatory system can be even more serious.
Definitely. Think about it. Our cells need a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients to function.
Right.
And if the circulatory system isn't working properly, those vital deliveries don't happen. And that can lead to all kinds of problems, from high blood pressure to heart attacks and even strokes.
So these transport systems aren't just cool and interesting to learn about. They're absolutely essential for life.
They are, and understanding how they work is crucial for addressing all sorts of challenges in human health, agriculture, even environmental science. It's a really important area of study.
Absolutely. Well, let's go back to those capillaries for a moment. You mentioned earlier that they have super thin walls, just one cell thick. Why is that so important for their function?
Well, that thin wall is what makes capillaries so good at exchange. It means that there's a very short distance for things to travel between the blood and the surrounding tissues. It's like having a super thin membrane that allows for easy diffusion.
So it's all about maximizing efficiency.
Exactly. The thinner the wall, the faster the exchange.
But you also mentioned capillaries with those little holes, the fenestrations.
Yeah, the fenestrations.
Where are they found and what's their purpose?
Well, you find fenestrations in places where you need even faster transport, especially for larger molecules. They're like express lanes on the capillary highway.
Gotcha.
You'll find them in organs like the kidneys, where blood filtration happens, and the small intestine, where nutrients are absorbed from food.
So it's like having different types of capillaries for different jobs.
Exactly. It's all about matching the structure to the function.
Now let's shift gears and talk about arteries again. Those thick, elastic walls, why are they so important?
They have to be tough because they carry blood away from the heart, which is under high pressure.
Right, it's like a high-pressure water pipe.
Exactly. And those thick walls, made of smooth muscle and elastic tissue, allow the arteries to handle that pressure. They expand and recoil with each heartbeat, kind of like a rubber band, making sure the blood flow is smooth and continuous.
It's amazing how dynamic the system is, constantly adjusting to the heart's rhythm.
It is. It's a beautiful example of how form and function are intertwined.
Now, what about veins? Their walls are thinner than arteries, so how do they prevent backflow, especially in the lower parts of the body, where gravity is working against them?
Well, veins have these clever one-way valves that act like little trapdoors.
Uh-huh.
They only allow blood to flow in one direction, towards the heart.
Okay.
And they get a little help from your muscles, too.
Right, the muscle pump.
Exactly. As your muscles contract, they squeeze the veins, helping to push the blood along.
It's like a natural boost for the blood flow.
It is, and it's especially important in the legs, where blood has to travel a long way upward.
Okay, let's zoom in on the heart again. It has those four chambers, but why is that four-chambered structure so important?
Well, those four chambers, the two atria and the two ventricles, allow the heart to act as two separate pumps working together.
Okay.
The right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the body and sends it to the lungs to pick up oxygen.
Right.
And the left side receives that freshly oxygenated blood from the lungs and pumps it out to the rest of the body.
So it's a really efficient system, keeping the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood separate.
Exactly. It's like having two specialized pumps working side by side.
Now, you mentioned earlier that cardiac muscle is special.
Hmm.
What makes it so different from other types of muscle in our bodies?
Well, cardiac muscle is unique because it's designed for continuous rhythmic contractions. It never gets tired, and it keeps beating without you having to think about it.
That's pretty amazing.
It is, and it's all thanks to the way cardiac muscle cells are structured. They're interconnected through these things called intercalated discs, which allow electrical signals to travel quickly from one cell to another.
So when one cell contracts, it triggers the next one, and so on,
Yeah.
creating this wave of contraction that spreads throughout the heart.
Exactly. It's like a synchronized dance of cells.
And this synchronized contraction is what generates the force needed to pump blood throughout the body.
You got it.
Now, what about the pacemaker? How does it control the heart rate?
The pacemaker, or SA node, is a group of specialized cells in the heart that generate electrical impulses.
Okay,
These impulses spread through the heart muscle, triggering those contractions we were just talking about.
gotcha.
The pacemaker can adjust the heart rate based on your body's needs. It speeds things up when you're exercising and slows things down when you're resting.
So it's like the heart's own internal control system,
Precisely.
and it's all automatic. We don't have to consciously think about it.
Right, it just works.
Now, well, this has been incredibly eye-opening. From those tiny capillaries to the powerful pump of the heart, these transport systems are truly amazing.
They are, and they highlight the interconnectedness of all the different parts of an organism, how everything works together to keep us alive.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the xylem and phloem in plants to the circulatory system in mammals. And we've seen how these seemingly different systems actually rely on some of the same basic principles.
Right, like pressure gradients and diffusion.
It's a great example of how physics and biology work together to create these incredibly complex and efficient systems.
It is, and as you continue your studies in IB biology, remember that these transport systems are just the beginning. There's a whole world of biological wonders out there waiting to be explored.
Well said, and don't be afraid to share what you've learned with others. Spreading knowledge is how we all learn and grow.
Absolutely, knowledge is power, and it's meant to be shared.
It's like a global delivery service, making sure every cell gets what it needs to survive and thrive. But here's something I've been wondering about. We talked about how plants use pressure gradients for transport, but their system seems a lot more passive compared to animals with their powerful hearts. Are there any downsides to this reliance on passive transport?
That's a great observation. You're right, plants rely heavily on passive transport, and that does come with certain limitations. For example, their transport system is much slower than animals.
That makes sense. If you don't have a heart actively pumping fluids, things are bound to move a bit slower.
Exactly. And this slower transport rate can limit a plant's ability to respond quickly to changes in the environment, like a sudden drought, for instance.
So it's a trade-off. Plants have evolved this incredibly efficient system that doesn't require a lot of energy, but it comes at the cost of speed and responsiveness.
Precisely. It's a fascinating example of how evolution has shaped different strategies for survival. Now, let's revisit the mammalian heart for a moment. You described it as this powerful pump, but how does it actually generate that force to propel blood throughout the body? What's the mechanism behind those contractions?
That's a great question. I know it involves electrical signals, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
It's all about the interplay between specialized cells and electrical impulses. Remember the pacemaker we discussed? It sets the heart's rhythm, but the actual contraction force comes from the cardiac muscle cells themselves.
Okay, so the pacemaker is like the conductor, and the muscle cells are the musicians.
A perfect analogy. These cardiac muscle cells are unique because they're connected by structures called intercalated discs, which allow electrical signals to spread rapidly from one cell to the next.
So it's like a chain reaction. One cell contracts, triggering the next, and so on.
Exactly. This synchronized contraction of all the muscle cells in the heart chambers generates the force needed to push blood throughout the entire body.
Incredible. It's like a perfectly choreographed dance of cells, all working together to keep the blood flowing.
It really is, and it highlights the importance of both electrical and mechanical processes in the heart's function.
Well, this deep dive has truly opened my eyes to the complexity and just the sheer beauty of these transport systems. From those microscopic pores and capillaries to the powerful pumping of the heart, It's amazing how these systems work nonstop to keep us alive.
It is a testament to the power of evolution and how interconnected all living things truly are.
Well, Mr. Martin's class, we've reached the end of our journey exploring the fascinating world of transport systems. We've delved into those intricate networks of xylem and phloem in plants and the remarkable circulatory system we find in mammals.
And we've seen how these systems, while different in their specifics, share similar principles, relying on things like pressure gradients and diffusion to make sure everything runs smoothly.
And let's not forget those clever adaptations, those unique tweaks that each organism has developed to make these systems work perfectly for them.
Absolutely. And as you continue your IB biology studies, keep in mind that these transport systems are just one piece of the puzzle. There's a whole universe of biological wonders out there waiting for you to discover them.
So keep those questions coming, stay curious, and never stop exploring. And who knows, maybe you'll be the one to make the next big discovery in biology.
Well said. Until next time, keep those minds engaged and happy exploring.